The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Doidge, M.D. Picture this. You're falling, not in a dream, but right now while you're wide awake. You stand up, and immediately your body starts wobbling like you're balancing on a tightrope in a windstorm. Your arms shoot out, desperately grabbing for something, anything, to steady yourself. Some invisible force keeps shoving you, left, then right. Right, then left. You collapse onto the floor, hoping for relief, but it doesn't help. Now you're falling through the floor itself, tumbling through an endless, silent void that has no bottom. This nightmare was Cheryl Schultz's everyday reality. For 5 years, her world spun in a dizzying, chaotic blur. A hospital antibiotic had obliterated her balance system, that delicate mechanism in her inner ear that tells you which way is up. The doctors delivered their verdict like a prison sentence. The damage was permanent. There was no hope. For 400 years, science had backed up this kind of grim diagnosis. It was called the doctrine of the unchanging brain. Medical schools around the world taught the same depressing lesson. Your brain is like an incredibly complex machine. Once childhood construction is complete, the wiring is set in stone. Damage a part? It stays damaged. Born with a limitation? You're stuck with it forever. The brain, they insisted with absolute certainty, simply cannot change. But here's the thing. What if one of science's most fundamental beliefs was completely, spectacularly wrong? Today we're exploring a book that documents nothing less than a revolution in how we understand the human mind. It's called The Brain That Changes Itself by Dr. Norman Doidge. This isn't some dry textbook stuffed with jargon. It's a collection of absolutely mind-bending true stories that prove our brains aren't rigid machines at all. They're living, breathing, constantly adapting organs that are far more flexible than we ever imagined. By the time we're done today, you'll understand the single most important discovery about the human brain in 4 centuries, something called neuroplasticity. You'll learn that your thoughts, your habits, the things you do every day aren't just outputs of your brain. They're actually the tools that sculpt and reshape it, minute by minute, day by day. You'll meet the rebel scientists who fought the establishment, and the brave patients like Cheryl, who were told their conditions were hopeless, only to prove everyone wrong by literally rewiring their own minds. This knowledge will completely transform how you think about learning, habits, healing, and the astonishing potential hiding inside your own skull. So what happened to the woman who couldn't stop falling? Her story is where we begin, and it opens a door to a world of human possibility that we're only just starting to understand. For 4 centuries, one powerful idea dominated everything we thought we knew about the brain. We saw it as a sophisticated machine, with each component locked into a specific, unchangeable job. Damage your vision center? You go blind. Stroke hits the part controlling your left arm? That arm is paralyzed for life. The circuits were hardwired. End of story. This belief, known as localizationism, bred what you might call neurological nihilism, a depressing sense that countless brain problems were simply beyond help. But away from the spotlight, a handful of brilliant scientists, often mocked and dismissed by their peers, were making discoveries that would blow this old dogma to smithereens. These were the pioneers of neuroplasticity, and their work revealed a brain that wasn't fixed at all, but fluid, dynamic, and capable of truly remarkable self-repair. One of the earliest and boldest pioneers was Dr. Paul Bach-y-Rita. He loved asking questions that seemed almost ridiculous, like, do we actually need eyes to see? To him, this wasn't some abstract philosophical puzzle. It was a practical challenge. He argued that we don't really see with our eyes at all. We see with our brains. Eyes are just the input devices, the ports that feed electrical signals to your brain. So what if, he wondered, you could feed the same kind of visual information to the brain through a completely different port? This brings us back to Cheryl Schultz, the woman trapped in that endless fall. Her vestibular apparatus, that tiny balance system in her inner ear, had been almost completely wiped out. This microscopic organ is what gives us our sense of where we are in space. Without it, her brain was drowning in constant, chaotic error signals. She felt like she was falling because, as far as her brain could tell, she was. Bacurita and his team created a device that looked absolutely bizarre. It consisted of a construction helmet fitted with an accelerometer sensor, connected to a thin plastic strip covered in electrodes. Cheryl placed that strip on her tongue. When she tilted her head forward, the sensor triggered a pattern of gentle, tingling sensations, like champagne bubbles, she said, on the front of her tongue. Tilt back. The bubbles moved to the back. Side to side, the bubbles followed. Essentially, this contraption was bypassing her broken balance system entirely and feeding orientation signals to her brain through her tongue. The instant she put it on, something incredible happened. For the first time in 5 years, the sensation of falling just stopped. With her eyes closed, relying only on those tingles on her tongue, she could stand perfectly still. Those invisible demons that had been shoving her around, gone. Her brain, with zero prior training, immediately started decoding the signals from her tongue and using them to maintain balance. But here's where it gets really miraculous. What happened when she took the device off? After wearing the machine for just 20 minutes, she removed it. She stood on her own, eyes closed, and she didn't fall. The effect lingered. The first time, it lasted 20 seconds, then a few minutes, then an hour. Eventually, the after effect stretched to days, then months. So what was actually happening? Bacurita believed the device was doing two things at once. First, it was feeding her brain clear, accurate balance signals, which helped quiet the noisy, scrambled signals still coming from her damaged vestibular system. But more importantly, the training was forcing her brain to discover new pathways. Just like you'd take back roads to reach your destination if the main highway bridge collapsed, Cheryl's brain was uncovering and strengthening backup neural routes to process balance. With enough practice, those new pathways became so robust and efficient that she didn't need the machine anymore at all. Today, she doesn't consider herself disabled. Bacurita's work was a direct assault on the old, rigid model of the brain. He showed that our senses aren't hardwired to specific brain locations. The brain is so remarkably adaptable, it can learn to see through the skin or balance through the tongue. He called this sensory substitution, but what it really demonstrated was the breathtaking power of neuroplasticity. The miracle wasn't the machine. It was the living, changing, adapting brain itself. If the brain could be rewired with an external device, could it also be rewired from the inside, using nothing but the power of thought and determined effort? This question leads us to the extraordinary story of Barbara Arrowsmith Young. As a child, Barbara's mind was a study in contrasts. She had areas of genuine brilliance. Her auditory and visual memory tested in the 99th percentile. But these gifts existed alongside crushing disabilities. She struggled with spatial reasoning, which made her clumsy and constantly lost. The speech center of her brain didn't work right, so pronouncing words was a battle. But her most devastating problem was an inability to grasp relationships between symbols. Logic, grammar, cause and effect, even reading a simple clock, all of it was fog. The phrase, "my father's brother," meant exactly the same thing to her as "my brother's father." Her world was a jumble of disconnected pieces, and her constant, agonizing refrain became, "I don't get it." In the 1950s, there was no name for her cluster of problems. Teachers just said she had a mental block. Desperate to succeed, she leaned on her incredible memory, spending hours memorizing facts to scrape through tests, surviving on just a few hours of sleep each night, living in perpetual anxiety. Her life changed when she stumbled across the work of two scientists. The first was Mark Rosenzweig, who had demonstrated that rats raised in enriched, stimulating environments developed heavier, more densely connected brains than rats raised in boring, empty cages. This was one of the first clear demonstrations that activity could physically alter the brain's structure. The second was Alexander Luria, a Russian neuropsychologist. In Luria's work, she read about a soldier named Zazetsky, who'd taken a bullet to the head that damaged the exact part of the brain where different perceptions get integrated. Zazetsky wrote in his diary, "I knew what the words mother and daughter meant, but not the expression mother's daughter." Reading those words, Barbara thought, "He's describing my life." For the first time, she understood that her problem had a specific address in the brain. But Luria offered no cure. Feeling more hopeless than ever, she considered ending her life. That's when she made a revolutionary connection. If Rosenzweig was right, that the brain could be changed through stimulation, and Luria was right about where her specific deficit was located, then maybe, just maybe, she could design exercises to target and strengthen that weakened part of her brain. Instead of working around her weakness, the standard approach at the time, she decided to attack it head-on. She created hundreds of cards showing pictures of clock faces, displaying different, increasingly complex times. She couldn't understand the relationship between the hands, so she forced herself to practice, hour after grueling hour, day after exhausting day. She'd try to tell the time, then check the answer on the back. It was brutal, draining work. But after weeks of this intense, focused practice, something started to shift. Not only could she read clocks with lightning speed, but her other problems started melting away too. For the first time in her life, she could grasp grammar, understand logic, and follow conversations in real time. The fog was lifting. Encouraged by this breakthrough, she designed exercises for all her other disabilities, and, one by one, brought them up to normal levels. Barbara Arrowsmith Young didn't just compensate for her deficits, she healed them. She built herself a better brain. Today, she runs the Arrowsmith School, where she uses these principles to help children with learning disabilities do exactly the same thing. The children don't just work around their problems, they do targeted brain exercises that strengthen the underlying weak cognitive functions. Children who couldn't read a clock now solve 10-handed clocks in seconds. Children with poor handwriting trace intricate patterns to stimulate the motor areas of their brain, which improves not just their writing, but their speaking and reading fluency as well. Barbara's work demonstrates that thinking of the brain as a muscle that grows with exercise isn't just a nice metaphor, it's actual, physical reality. With focused effort, we can target specific weaknesses and literally change our brain's structure to overcome them. The stories of Cheryl and Barbara are inspiring, sure, but they raise a deeper question. How exactly does the brain change? What's actually happening at the microscopic level? To answer this, we turn to Dr. Michael Merzenich, widely described as the world's leading researcher on brain plasticity. Merzenich is the scientist who literally mapped the changing brain. In the mid-20th century, neurosurgeons like Wilder Penfield had created the first maps of the brain. By electrically stimulating the brains of conscious patients during surgery, he discovered that specific parts of the body corresponded to specific points on the brain's surface. There was a map for the hand next to the map for the arm, and so on. These maps, everyone assumed, were universal and fixed from birth. Merzenich, using a far more precise technique called micromapping, discovered this was completely wrong. In a series of elegant and simple experiments, he proved that our brain maps are dynamic and constantly reshaping themselves in response to our experiences. In one landmark experiment, he carefully mapped the hand area in a monkey's brain. Then, he amputated the monkey's middle finger. After a few months, he mapped the brain again. The area that had once processed signals from the middle finger wasn't silent and empty. It had been completely taken over by the maps for the adjacent fingers, the index and ring fingers. This revealed two fundamental laws of brain plasticity. The first is, use it or lose it. Brain real estate is valuable. If a map isn't being used, the brain reassigns that territory to a function that is. The second is that plasticity is competitive. There's a constant war for territory raging inside your brain. The skills you practice are constantly claiming more map space, often at the expense of the skills you neglect. This is why learning a new language as an adult is so brutally hard. It's not just that some critical window has closed. It's that the maps for your native language have become so vast and dominant that they aggressively crowd out any new language trying to establish itself. It's also why bad habits are so stubborn. A bad habit isn't just a choice. It's a well-established neural circuit that's claimed a hefty chunk of territory in your brain map. In another ingenious experiment, Merzenich temporarily sewed two of a monkey's fingers together, so they always moved and felt things at the same time. When he mapped the brain again, he found that the once separate maps for those two fingers had merged into a single, large map. This demonstrated another crucial principle. Neurons that fire together, wire together. When we perform an action or have a thought, the neurons involved fire in sync. The more often they fire together, the stronger their connections become, and the more likely they are to fire together in the future. This is the very essence of learning and habit formation at the cellular level. Merzenich's work proved, beyond any doubt, that the adult brain stays plastic throughout life, and he took this knowledge out of the lab and into the real world. He realized that many children with learning disabilities struggled because their neurons were firing too slowly. They couldn't distinguish between rapid sounds like ba and da, which meant their brain maps for language were muddy and imprecise. So, along with a team of other scientists, he created a series of computer-based brain exercises called Fast Forward. These programs take the fast parts of speech, slow them down digitally so a child can hear them clearly, and then gradually speed them up as the child's brain improves at processing them. The results were stunning. Children who'd struggled for years made, on average, nearly 2 years of language development in just 6 weeks. Brain scans before and after the training showed that their brains were physically normalizing, developing the same patterns seen in children without reading problems. Merzenich showed that through targeted training, we can increase our brain's processing speed, sharpen its precision, and fundamentally improve our capacity to learn. But if plasticity has the power to heal and strengthen, can it also work against us? Can the brain's ability to change also create suffering? This question brings us to one of the most mysterious and agonizing experiences known to medicine, phantom limb pain. After an arm or leg is amputated, over 95% of people continue to feel its presence, and for many, that phantom limb is racked with excruciating, untreatable pain. How can you feel pain in a limb that literally doesn't exist anymore? The man who cracked this puzzle is Dr. V.S. Ramachandran, a neurologist often called the Sherlock Holmes of the brain. He connected Merzenich's discovery that the map for a missing finger gets invaded by its neighbors to the human experience. On the brain map, the area for the hand sits right next to the area for the face. Ramachandran theorized that after an arm amputation, the face map invades the now empty hand map. He tested this on a young man who'd lost an arm. When Ramachandran blindfolded him and touched his cheek with a cotton swab, the man felt it not only on his face, but also in his phantom hand. The brain had cross-wired the two maps. The brain was receiving sensory input from the face and misinterpreting it as coming from the missing hand. This explained the phantom, but what about the pain? Ramachandran noticed that many patients with painful phantoms felt their missing limb was paralyzed and clenched in an agonizing position, like a fist with the fingernails digging into the palm. He realized this was a form of learned paralysis. The brain was sending motor commands to the phantom to move, but because there was no arm, it received no feedback that the movement had occurred. The brain, getting no response, would escalate its commands, essentially screaming, "Clench harder!" This created a vicious cycle, locking the pain signal in place. Ramachandran's solution was breathtakingly simple and brilliant. He decided to fight an illusion with an illusion. He built a mirror box. It's just a simple box with a mirror down the middle. The patient places his good hand on one side of the box and his phantom hand on the other. By looking into the mirror, he sees the reflection of his good hand, which appears to be his missing hand, perfectly resurrected. When one patient, Philip, who'd suffered for a decade with a painfully clenched phantom, looked into the box and moved his good hand, he saw his phantom move for the first time. The visual feedback was enough to trick his brain. He felt his phantom unclench, and the pain vanished. After just a few weeks of practicing with the mirror box, his pain disappeared permanently. Ramachandran had performed the world's first successful amputation of a phantom limb. Ramachandran's work reveals a profound truth. Pain isn't just a signal from an injury. As he says, pain is an opinion on the organism's state of health. It's a complex perception created by the brain, and because it's created by the brain, it can be changed by the brain. This leads us to our final and perhaps most powerful example of neuroplasticity in action, the rewiring of our deepest anxieties and habits. Many of us have worries we can't quite shake, but for people with obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD, these worries become a form of mental torture. They're trapped in a loop of intrusive, terrifying thoughts, called obsessions, and repetitive rituals, called compulsions. They feel they absolutely must perform to get relief. UCLA psychiatrist Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz discovered that this experience has a clear signature in the brain. Using brain scans, he identified an OCD circuit involving three key parts of the brain. The first, the orbital frontal cortex, is our mistake detector. It sends a signal that something is wrong. This signal goes to the cingulate gyrus, which triggers the awful anxiety that comes with that feeling. Normally, a third part, the caudate nucleus, acts like a mental gear shift, allowing us to move on to the next thought once we've dealt with a mistake. In people with OCD, this circuit gets stuck in the on position. The mistake detector is hypersensitive, the anxiety center is blazing, and the gear shift is jammed. Schwartz calls this brain lock. Even after they've checked the stove 100 times, the something is wrong signal keeps firing, and they're trapped. Schwartz developed a 4-step therapy based on a simple but powerful idea. You can use your mind to change your brain. He teaches patients to use their conscious, focused attention to manually override the faulty circuit and create a new, healthy one. The first step is to relabel the thought. Instead of thinking, "my hands are contaminated," the patient learns to say, "I'm having an obsessive thought." This separates the person from the content of the obsession. The second step is to reattribute it to its true cause. This isn't a real threat. This is my OCD, a medical condition caused by a faulty brain circuit. The third and most crucial step is to refocus. The moment the obsessive thought hits, the patient must immediately shift their attention to a new, wholesome, and ideally enjoyable activity for at least 15 minutes. This could be gardening, playing music, or talking to a friend. This step is the manual gear shift. It's incredibly difficult at first, because the urge to perform the compulsion is overwhelming. But every single time the patient resists that urge and refocuses, they're doing two things. They're weakening the old, pathological OCD circuit, use it or lose it, and they're strengthening a new, healthy circuit, neurons that fire together, wire together. The final step, revalue, happens naturally over time as the patient comes to see the obsessions for what they truly are: meaningless, false alarms generated by a faulty brain. Schwartz proved his method works by taking brain scans of his patients before and after treatment. The after scans showed that the hyperactive OCD circuit had normalized. They had used nothing but their own focused minds to physically change their brains and free themselves from their mental prison. From sensory substitution to targeted exercises, from competitive plasticity to phantom limbs and brain lock, the stories in the brain that changes itself all point to the same revolutionary conclusion. The brain isn't some inanimate object, but a living, dynamic organ, one that's constantly changing in response to our experiences and our thoughts. We aren't merely the products of our brains, we're their architects. As we wrap up our exploration of the brain that changes itself, it's worth pausing to really appreciate the sheer scale of the shift this book represents. For centuries, we saw ourselves as fundamentally fixed. We were handed a brain at birth, and whatever its strengths and weaknesses, we were told that was the hand we had to play for the rest of our lives. This book, more than any other, demolishes that belief. It replaces the image of the brain as a rigid machine with the image of a living, evolving landscape, a landscape that we ourselves can actually shape. What strikes me most powerfully about all this is that it returns a profound sense of agency and hope to the human story. The discovery of neuroplasticity isn't just a scientific breakthrough, it's a philosophical one. It tells us that change is always possible. The stories of Cheryl Schiltz, Barbara Arrowsmith-Young, and the patients of Ramachandran and Schwartz aren't just medical curiosities, they're parables for the human condition. They show us that with the right tools, whether it's a machine that speaks to our tongue, a targeted mental exercise, or the power of focused attention, we can overcome limitations that once seemed absolutely insurmountable. For a young person standing at the beginning of their adult life, this is perhaps the most empowering message you could ever receive. Your brain is at its most plastic, its most malleable, right now. The habits you're building, the skills you're learning, the thoughts you're cultivating, they aren't just fleeting activities. They're actively, physically sculpting the person you're becoming. The principle of use it or lose it is playing out inside your head every single day. The neural pathways you strengthen through practice and attention will become the superhighways of your mind, while the ones you neglect will fade away. This might seem like a lot of pressure, but I actually see it as an incredible opportunity. It means you have the power to consciously build the brain you want. So how can you apply this today? Let me offer just a couple of simple actions. First, embrace new and challenging learning. Pick up that guitar you've always wanted to play, download an app to learn a new language, or dive deep into a subject that truly fascinates you. As Dr. Karansky, the 90-year-old doctor in the book showed, a life of continuous learning is a life of continuous brain rejuvenation. The feeling of effort, of struggle, isn't a sign of failure. It's the feeling of neuroplastic change. It's the feeling of your brain building new pathways. Second, practice the art of refocusing. The next time you find yourself stuck in a loop of negative thought, worrying about a test, replaying an awkward social interaction, or being hard on yourself, try Jeffrey Schwartz's technique. Relabel the thought for what it is. Just a thought, a signal from a brain circuit. And then, actively refocus your attention on something else that's positive and requires concentration. Don't fight the thought, just change the channel. By doing this, you're practicing the fundamental skill of a brain architect, choosing which circuits to strengthen and which to let wither. That was a summary of The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Doidge. We've explored some incredible territory today, but I'll be honest with you. A summary can only ever be a map. The real treasure is found when you make the journey yourself. The true magic of this book lies in the details of the stories and the quiet moments of reflection they inspire. This summary is designed to help you decide if this book is worth your time. If anything we've talked about today has sparked your curiosity or given you a sense of hope, I strongly encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning facts. It's an experience that can genuinely change the way you see yourself and the limitless potential of your own mind. The link to the book is in the description. Also, if you found this summary valuable and want to continue exploring life-changing ideas, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel, Billionaire's Bookshelf. That way, you won't miss our next journey into another incredible book. Let's keep learning and growing together.